What is up, guys? Rickakus here, and it is Saturday, so that means it's time to showcase some more amazing fan-made exotics for Destiny. Now, this is the only series that lets you submit your exotic weapon, armor, ghost shell artifact, or any Destiny exotic idea and have a realistic concept made for it. Now, that's because I've partnered with the artist Benjamin Radaman, who makes these amazingly realistic exotic concepts. His DeviantArt will be linked in the description down below. So what we're gonna do in today's video is showcase 5 featured exotic concepts that all came from the comments section of last week's video. Now, after we do that, we're going to showcase the rules for getting selected and also some tips to help you get picked. And lastly, we're going to go over all of the exotic concepts that were made since last week. However, it's very important to say that if you support this series and want to see more, please remember to help me out by simply rating and sharing this video. Additionally, make sure that you're submitting your ideas on the newest fan-made exotic video. If there's a newer video than this one, an annotation will pop up right now leading you to it. Now, with that all said and done, let's get started on this week's featured exotic concepts. Now we're gonna begin here with the Gremium exotic hand cannon concept by Legionodeath. Now, this exotic hand cannon has the exotic perk where this weapon deals 2% more damage for each guardian that is near you. Very interesting concept, one that I think is definitely going to need to be improved upon, but the concept, the base concept of it, I believe is a fantastic idea for an exotic hand cannon. So dealing 2% more damage for every guardian near you. That is pretty good in PvP. That may need to be adjusted to 3%, 4%, whatever makes it actually good and yet balanced, but the idea of being in a situation where you're perhaps outnumbered 2 to 1 or God forbid 3 to 1, but then getting that damage bonus, which will allow you to perhaps, get a 2-shot kill on a guardian, maybe take down that first enemy. Now it's then a 2v1, you can maybe get the other one, you can maybe even win that engagement if you're a very talented player. I don't think it would be necessarily overpowered either, because you would be in a 3v1 engagement to have this perk functioning at a very, very good rate. You may be able to take out one guy, but you're pretty much dead. Now, where this perk really comes into play for me is that you would have to change the word guardian to enemy. Just doing that would make this pretty damn good in PvE. In PvE, you are absolutely swarmed with enemies in multiple occasions. It's not a challenging thing to encounter 5 to 10 enemies near you, in which case you ignore the thralls charging at you, or you maybe get to the higher ground where they are still near you, triggering this effect, and then you can have 10%, or if change it to 3% or 4% more damage, you're having 20% more damage. If you're surrounded by thralls, you're up on a ledge somewhere, and then you're just damaging the boss, getting this massive damage bonus, in which case, very, very good for a primary weapon to have that much of a damage bonus in PvE. That's really where I think this gun would be very, very useful and interesting if this perk was just tweaked a little bit. So just adjust the value from 2% to 3 or 4, and then change the word guardian to enemy, and you have a much better surrounded perk that'll make this gun, I believe, pretty decent in PvE and PvP. Moving on, the next exotic concept we're going to cover is the Forge Stoker exotic shotgun concept by My Name is Chief. Now, this is a very interesting exotic concept. It is kind of along the lines of some of the stuff we've seen before, but it's basically an evolution of the class-specific legendaries like the Amobius shotgun, which of course requires you to have a Defender Titan bubble. So these are exotic weapons that require you to have a certain class in order to actually gain the benefit. Very interesting ideas, something that I wish Bungie would explore, but in this case for the Forge Stoker we have 2 exotic perks. The first is a passive perk, Forger's Glory. running through a sunspot gives you increased armor and rate of fire with this weapon. The next exotic perk is the Fire Within. Running through a sunspot gives the user a full magazine, and Battle Runner activates, this gun does have Battle Runner, for an additional 2 seconds. So, you're using the Forge Stoker shotgun, and you only get these benefits, which are pretty substantial, increasing your armor, rate of fire, reloading your magazine instantly, when you run through a sunspot. Now, sunspots are created most commonly if you're set up for them in your build for throwing your hammers. Every time you throw your hammer with the correct build setup, you're going to create a sunspot, but you can also actually get them from just doing a melee attack. So you melee an enemy, you're going to create a sunspot right there. Now, of course, we're all very familiar with the wombo combo of shotgun melee. Shotgun and then meleeing right after, or meleeing and then shotgunning is a huge part of the game. A lot of people do that all the time. And so, being able to have a Titan with perhaps the Thagomizers, which give you an extra melee charge, that's going to let you activate sunspots a lot more often and get those benefits with your shotgun. And the fact that I'm already thinking of different class setups that would make this shotgun work at its best potential is kind of exactly what you want with an exotic. You want to just open up the possibilities to create class setups around these weapons and have new gameplay possibilities within Destiny, and that is definitely a good thing when we're talking about exotic concepts. But in any event, if you do have a class setup in which you're activating Sunspot a decent amount of time and getting those bonuses for the Forge Stoker, I think that would mainly be in PvE, but it would still be pretty good by the sounds of it. Now moving on, we have Ghost of the Garden, exotic ghost shell concept by Jonny Walters. This is of course in reference to the Black Garden. Now this exotic ghost shell has quite a few interesting abilities. Firstly, it has the main perk, A Dead Thing. When dying, you give a temporary speed boost to your allies. Decently useful, you know, if you die in any sort of activity, your allies are going to get a little bit of a speed boost. So, you know, purely useful in making the best out of a bad situation in that you died. Next, we have 2 different tree perks you're going to have to select between. You have Guardian Bounty, gain Glimmer from killing Guardians in the Crucible, or you can choose from the Garden, gain Glimmer upon killing Vex, including Taken Vex. Then you have the exotic perk, A Dead Power. When you spawn in or are revived, you gain bonus damage and movement speed until taking damage from enemies. So, pretty damn interesting and pretty damn useful ability. So when you spawn in or you're revived, you gain bonus damage and movement speed until you get hit, until you get a single shot or a single, ounce of damage from any source, then that ability goes away. So when you have 1v1s, you're not necessarily going to be getting that massive of a bonus, because whenever you're hit back, you're going to lose your bonus entirely. Additionally, I think that, even with that being said, this is a very, very powerful ability. And therefore, I think this would have to be, a 5% or less damage bonus and a pretty minor movement speed. Something that is, mathematically useful and noticeable, but very slightly. If you have any sort of massive damage bonus from this, especially because it's when you spawn in. So if you're playing Trials and you spawn in and get a 10% damage bonus for your first shot, that's a big deal. That is a very big deal. And so dialing that back to something more reasonable could make this still quite useful and something that people are going to want to go after and get this ghost shell, etc., but something that's not overwhelming to play against. Moving on, we have Man's Best Friend, exotic auto rifle concept by the Spectral 10. Now this weapon has the exotic perk 2 birds 1 stone. This weapon is a medium rate of fire auto rifle archetype while standing and sprinting and jumping and all of that stuff. However, when you crouch with this weapon, its scope will actually double in zoom and it will become a slow to medium rate of fire scout rifle. So I believe that's something like the Jgugjuhi. So that's pretty interesting. Running around, engaging enemies, most of the time you have an auto rifle. However, if you're at a long range map, if you see an enemy engaging you from far ways away, you can just crouch and then suddenly have a scout rifle to deal with that enemy. It's kind of like a reverse Fabian strategy, the Titan exclusive exotic, where if enemies are close by, it moves from a medium rate of fire auto rifle to a high rate of fire auto rifle. This, again, is kind of the opposite. It's initially, again, a medium rate of fire auto rifle, but it then transforms into a long range weapon, not a closer range weapon. And I think this actually is a lot more useful and gives you a lot more utility than something like the Fabian strategy. The Fabian strategy, you don't necessarily get to choose when it switches over. It just automatically switches over when enemies are nearby. But this weapon, you can purposely pick your engagements when you want this weapon to become a scout rifle. And that fact that you get to choose when you transform it and it doesn't just automatically transform is a huge plus for this weapon, I believe, over something like the Fabian strategy. Very interesting idea here, and the fact that you quite literally have two weapons in one is undoubtedly useful in both PvE and PvP. PvP, it's really gonna depend on whether this gun is a good auto rifle and a good scout rifle, both rolled into one. And of course, you know, being an auto rifle in today's meta maybe isn't the best thing, but again, like the factor of you can crouch, engage some enemies, you know, long range arrays, depending on if you're on a trials map, you go outside, can get that scout rifle damage on those enemies, perhaps pick off one or two, then go inside and you have a close range auto rifle, all in one, not having to switch a weapon. The utility is very, very good. You know, whether or not this gun would actually see play competitively, again, is more gonna depend on the meta and the other perks, but it's undoubtedly a cool idea. Now moving on, the last exotic concept we're going over today is the Area's Wings exotic hunter cloak concept by Gabriel Shaw. Now this class armor has two unique perks. Firstly, the intrinsic perk Tailwind, gain faster sprint speed and also gain +2 agility. So if the sprint speed was, you know, not too insane, this would be basically like a slightly better lightweight. Intrinsically, you know, no problem with that. Lightweight isn't necessarily the most useful perk in Destiny, so just having that, again, intrinsically, overall is quite useful, but nothing insane. The exotic perk is Roost. Crouching and remaining still for 3 seconds will considerably raise your recovery. This perk will stop after full health is achieved. So that's a pretty interesting perk as well, being able to, you know, you're hurt a lot in PvE or PvP, you find a spot to just kind of, you know, get away from the fray, crouch, and massively boost your recovery, gain your health back, and then get back into the fight a little bit sooner. That seems like a pretty darn useful ability as well, and it's something that again would work with an exotic class armor concept like this, without being necessarily too much of an advantage, because of course the main debate when it comes to class armor exotics and whether or not they should be implemented is really one of, do you want to have the life exotic perk to which the current exotic class armors have, you know, the faction exotic class armors that just massively increase the faction rep gains. Those are exotic and they have the life exotic perk so that you can use them in addition with other exotic armor pieces. Or would you have exotic class armors that have very, very useful abilities but would actually take up your exotic slot, so you wouldn't be able to use the exotic class armor and another exotic armor piece? Now of course you could always have both. You could have certain exotic class armors that have the life exotic. This seems like it would fit into that, where it just has a few useful abilities that you'd want to get, but nothing drastically overpowered or drastically, you know, super useful that would conflict with people who don't have this exotic. They don't have a massive disadvantage, but it's still nonetheless a useful ability that you're going to want to go for. However, you could also just make this concept actually take up an exotic slot, so you wouldn't be able to use another armor piece with it. Kick up the sprint speed so it's something substantial. Make the recovery activate even faster, and then suddenly you have an actual just another exotic armor piece that's competing with other armor pieces. Like, you have a lot of design space, as I said, with these exotic class armor ideas, and it's something that I think Bungie should definitely experiment with. And that's going to wrap up this week's episode of Fan-Made Exotics. Now, if you want to submit your exotic idea, all you need to do is reply to the official comment I'm going to leave in the comment section down below. So I'm going to make a comment saying, reply here with your exotic idea, and simply do that. Now, thread number 1 is going to fill up with the 500 reply limit pretty quickly, and I'll be there to put thread number 2 in as quickly as possible after that. Don't worry if you're in thread number 2, Benjamin does look at both threads for ideas. Additionally, some tips for getting selected. Firstly, try to self-regulate your idea, make sure it's not overpowered. Additionally, try to pick an idea that's realistic for Destiny. Turning into a dragon after a kill is not something that's going to be introduced anytime soon. Thirdly, try to make sure your idea is not overly complicated. You can have cool, new, unique ideas, but if you have an essay to explain it, that's just a little too much. Remember, in-game you would have to explain everything when your cruiser just goes over the perk symbol, so you can't have paragraphs upon paragraphs popping up. Aside from that, however, don't be afraid to experiment outside of the traditional, weapon setups and weapon classes. Don't be afraid to make SMGs, laser rifles, heavy sniper rifles, chain guns, all of that stuff. That is all totally okay. Now, on to the last part of today's video. We're going to showcase all of the different creations that were made since last week. Firstly, we have Cade's Master Key, exotic hand cannon concept by Nico Robinson. After that, we have the Spine of Io, exotic hunter chest concept by Wildfire. Moving on, we have the Antares, exotic scout rifle concept by iccirrus. And lastly, we have the Ragnarok, exotic auto rifle concept by Jgugjuhi. And so guys, that's going to wrap up today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Now, if you did and want to support this series, please remember to like this video and especially share it. Now, if you want to see more Destiny content similar to this and don't want to miss out on the next episode of Fan-Made Exotics, all you need to do is slap that subscribe button. If you want to get in touch with me and tell me thread number 1 is full, the best way to do so is to follow me on Twitter at rickcacus. That's linked in the description down below, as is my Twitch channel, which you can also follow. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.